Hello and welcome to the Home Assistant Podcast. My name is Phil. Joining me as usual, I've got Rohan. How's it going?
Hey, good, thanks.
And joining us today, we've got Keir. How's it going?
Good to see you guys.
This episode is sponsored by Home Assistant Cloud by Nabu Casa. Easily access your local Home Assistant instance remotely for a small monthly fee that supports the Home Assistant and ESP Home projects. Configuration is done by the user interface, so there's no fiddling with router settings, SSL certificates, or any YAML.
All right.
So whereabouts are you joining us from today?
I'm in Minneapolis, Minnesota.
And Rohan, you sound a bit different today. Obviously, you're not in Toronto today.
That's right. I am not. I'm in Killarney, Ontario, I think I want to say. It's a beautiful little cottage town, just like 4.5, 5 hours north of me. So
very cool. All right. Yeah. Well, so Keir, let's break it down. Let's find out a bit about yourself and how you've got into Home Assistant. So whereabouts did your home automation journey kick off from?
Sure. So a couple of years ago, my wife and I were renting a house, and we have 2 cats. We want to be able to make sure like everything was okay at the house, mostly just
right.
Since we're in Minnesota, like the heat doesn't go out in the winter, make sure that doesn't happen. And if it does, we'd find out about it. So we got we started by having a Google Nest camera pointed at a thermometer inside the house. So a little bit janky. Then we upgraded to a Nest thermostat at that house. And that was sort of where I first started getting into some of the smart home tech stuff. It was just through the Nest. At that time, it wasn't Google's Nest. It was just Nest. And then in 2018, we moved into our own house. And the Nest thermostat wasn't compatible with the furnace that we got. So we're looking to sort of replicate that same sort of functionality. And with the furnace that we have and the thermostat control system, there's actually a third-party open source project called Infinitive, where somebody has sort of reverse engineered the communication between the thermostat and the furnace. And so you can connect a Raspberry Pi to a USB to serial converter, and you can communicate to the furnace with the same sort of commands that thermostat did. And that was certainly an ambitious project for me at the time, but I set up a Raspberry Pi 3, and there's also a Home Assistant custom component for it, of course. So knowing that was out there was sort of my impetus for really trying to get Home Assistant working, so that we had that same Nest functionality with our furnace, because obviously we weren't about to replace the furnace just to have remote access.
That's actually really cool.
Yeah, I was super stoked when that all came together. The Infinitive project is very cool. There are options for the older style thermostat where it communicates directly, and there's also some options where there's another fork of the project where somebody has sort of reverse engineered the communication for the wireless thermostat. We just have the wired one, but it's pretty easy to do. We actually had some wires exposed out of the furnace, so I didn't even have to open it up. There were just some thermostat wires sort of capped off already, and I was able to tie into those, connect it all up, and then it's pretty cool when I could see all the information on a local web page.
The open source community is just amazing, right? Like that's very cool. Like that you're just able to download something to a Raspberry Pi, plug in some wires, and away you go. And that there's people just maintaining for all these different like furnaces and stuff. It's also interesting that you said that it wasn't compatible with the Nest, because I know I recently replaced my thermostat, and it seemed as though there was like a whole bunch of just standard wires that most thermostats use. Like CY, you've got H1, C1, all that, and Nest support. It will tell you what, depending on what cords you plug into it or cables you plug into it, it will dictate what features you can control through your Nest. So yeah, must be was it a little bit an old style system that just wasn't using those common sort of wires that was your issue?
Well, what I was told by our furnace tech HVAC company was that the Nest could technically communicate with it, like it would work, but you would lose some of the efficiencies of a modulating furnace where the thermostat tells it to sort of slowly ramp up or run at a lower speed, and the Nest thermostat was sort of just like high speed, low speed, nothing in between.
Yep. Right, on or off, essentially. Yeah.
So we didn't want to sacrifice the efficiencies of the furnace. Yeah. So that's why we looked into Infinitive, and that worked out. But yeah, around that same time, before I'd gotten into Home Assistant much, it was sort of a mishmash of different smart home systems. Like this was before This is around the Works with Nest era for Google, as opposed to whatever their current platform is.
Yeah, like it works with
Yeah.
Google Assistant or works with Nest by Google or something like that. Yeah.
So I had some Wemo smart plugs, so I'd be able to turn the lights on and off, and then the Nest cameras. But that was about it. And obviously those systems didn't talk to each other at all. But once I had more reason to have Home Assistant instance set up for this Infinitive platform, then I started looking into other things that were compatible with Home Assistant. And from there, you're just down the rabbit hole.
Yeah. Now does your furnace Raspberry Pi, I'm assuming that's an independent Raspberry Pi from whatever your Home Assistant's running on and all the other stuff. It's just a dedicated box that's just furnace box.
Yep. Yeah. Right now, the Raspberry Pi, or the furnace Raspberry Pi, is the 3B, and I initially started using Home Assistant on that with an SD card, and I suffered from the SD card failures that were also common.
Yeah.
So then I got a Raspberry Pi 4 for the Home Assistant, which actually works as well as I needed to, and then I just repurposed the Pi 3 box for the Infinitive system.
That's cool.
So I guess, you've got your furnace. So then that prompted you to do Home Assistant. Had you used any other home automation software before then?
Yeah, I briefly looked into OpenHab, but I couldn't really wrap my mind around some of the terminology, like the bindings, I think, and just how some of that stuff was put together.
Right.
So I tried to try that out, but I didn't get very far at all. And then Home Assistant at the time just seemed like it was a little bit more accessible. Like I'm fairly tech savvy and certainly getting more so with Home Assistant, but I just couldn't manage to make OpenHab work. So got into Home Assistant, I don't know, probably around the 0.7x releases, somewhere around there, probably late 2018, which is, we moved into our house about 4 years ago. And the Home Assistant has been running pretty smoothly since I migrated to the Raspberry Pi 4 with the SSD instead of the SD card. That made a huge difference.
Mm-hmm.
And have since just sort of been adding things slowly. Our house was built in 1973, so most of our light switches don't have neutral wires. That really limits what we can do as far as smart lighting. So we have a bunch of Lutron Casa wireless stuff because the dimmers anyways don't require neutral switches. And those are also really readily available at like Home Depot and Lowe's.
Mm-hmm.
So that works out well. We do have some Z-Wave switches. We have some ceiling fans installed and the electrician was here. So we just had them add the neutral wire for those. And then a bunch of Wi-Fi devices. I have a lot of ESP home stuff, mostly temperature, humidity sensors, but also tied into a couple other things we can talk about. And then some Zigbee, Akara, door and window sensors. So a couple different protocols.
Yeah, a bit of a mishmash.
Yeah. I was using the WiseSense. The V1 sensors, the door window sensors that were pretty inexpensive and nice to use, but then ended up losing the MAC address if you didn't replace the battery while it was still high enough.
Just a slight bug.
But yeah, just a slight. But I have been slowly replacing those with the Akara door and window sensors just because my theory or my rationale was that if they die and they can't be relied upon, then it sort of negates the utility of
agreed.
using something.
Well, especially as it relates to like home security, right? Sorry, Phil.
Yeah, exactly.
The last thing you want is, like a door sensor or a window sensor just stop working, halfway through the day. Then...
Yeah, having to be unreliable. So I've been digging into Zigbee a little bit more lately with those and learning about getting a good mesh in place, with learning about the Zigbee signal values and learning what those mean, how to make sure that you're going to get reliable responses from all of that.
Yeah, good for you for jumping into that. I mean, I know like radio frequencies are just a whole other planet, right? Like we're just learning about it and getting into that and stuff like that. And yeah, so that's awesome.
Yeah, I was a little concerned when I started sort of digging more into Zigbee. I know some people say that there can be Wi-Fi interference. Fortunately, haven't run into any of that yet. We have a bunch of the Nest Wi-Fi pucks around.
Yeah.
So don't have a whole lot of configurability on the Wi-Fi system. So I was sort of just crossing my fingers and hoping that the Zigbee didn't screw anything up. And so far, so good.
Yeah. Are you doing any Bluetooth stuff as well?
Yeah, we have. So when we moved into our house, one of the things I wanted to check for was radon. I mean, it's not a really old house built in the 70s. I just wanted to sort of, cross that off the list in terms of homeowner things.
Right.
So I bought an AirThings device, which does radon, temperature, humidity, CO2, VOC, and I found another custom component where the Raspberry Pi communicates directly with the AirThings device over Bluetooth Low Energy.
Nice.
So that has been working pretty flawlessly. There's now a AirThings cloud component natively in Home Assistant, so you can, if you have an AirThings account online, you can go ahead and pull it in that way. But I try to keep everything local if I can. Yeah. I mean, it's not, mission critical information, but still would prefer to have it direct if I can.
Sure.
Is radon a big thing in Canada? Like, I don't think I've ever heard of it. Like, the closest thing I've heard of is like asbestos in old houses, but I haven't heard of radon before.
I think it's, I don't know what your experience, Rohan, has been, but I think it's more common in colder climates where you have longer heating seasons, where doors and windows are closed, or, there's not as much airflow in the house. That's certainly when our levels seem to go up.
Right. Gotcha.
Yeah, it's not, I mean, I don't think there's any like mandate here for like radon sensing or anything like that, but like we have obviously CO2 and carbon monoxide that's required. Like I believe even your insurance companies, like if I know you don't have a smoke detector or whatever, your house catches on fire, they're gonna be like, well, too bad, right? Like it's better, but I don't think that's the case on for radon. But yeah, it's weird. It's one of those things that's not talked about too often, even here, right? Like even though, to your point, it's like it's a thing. It exists, right? You probably should. It's very unlikely that you would have that issue, but it's just right. But you might.
Yeah, fair enough.
Yeah, so the Raspberry Pi communicates directly with Bluetooth with that. One of the more recent ESP home releases actually also has an AirThings component where if you have a ESP32, it can talk directly to AirThings device. I've been using that too, just because I don't know. I tried to limit how many custom components I rely on, just because they seem, for the most part, not quite as well supported as Home Assistant native things or ESP Home. Now that that's part of Home Assistant, so at some point. Well, and I saw on Twitter that Home Assistant's going to stop supporting the BluePi Python library in an upcoming release. And I'm pretty sure that that's what the custom component is currently using. So At some point, I'm going to have to swap over to ESP Home directly. I pull all that stuff into Influx, and I have a Grafana dashboard for all of that, temperature, humidity. I'm running the Home Assistant supervised on, Raspbian or Raspberry Pi OS 10, so based on Debian Buster.
So you're still running this all on a Raspberry Pi?
Yep.
Like even Home Assistant?
Yep.
Yeah, nice.
Yeah, and the Home Assistant restarts are usually around a minute or so not too
That's not bad at all, yeah.
And not using an SD card, I'm assuming?
Nope, it's on a SSD. There was a point a couple of years ago where the Raspberry Pi 4 started to support the SSD boot directly, and that's sort of when I jumped over to it from the SSD or from the SD card.
Yeah, nice. Yeah, that makes sense.
Mm-hmm. And it's located in a drawer in my basement.
Nice.
It doesn't need much space and much airflow, but then I have all of my radios attached to it via USB.
Right.
So
Outside.
But I definitely wonder if, moving that to an upper floor or having like a longer USB cable would get me a little bit better Zigbee, Z-Wave reception, that kind of thing.
Yeah. You could also do something like, I think it's USB over Ethernet. Where you can, plug your cords into a USB port on a Raspberry Pi in the kitchen, and then have that, as a serial port over into the Raspberry Pi in the basement.
Sure.
That might be a solution to that.
I definitely keep that in mind. We have coax running through all of our walls as opposed to Ethernet directly. So I have a bunch of the Mocha adapters. So it could work with that. Could make that work. Haven't thought about it. Mostly I've just been adding Zigbee routers as needed, and that seems to do the trick.
Yeah, definitely. So what are you using to run your automations? Do you prefer the native Home Assistant, or have you gone down the Node-RED route?
I am 99% run Node-RED.
Okay, lovely. Interesting. So is that running on the same Pi as Home Assistant, or have you got it running somewhere else?
Since Home Assistant supervised is my deployment method, I've really sort of viewed it as like a gateway into self-hosting some stuff.
Yep.
So I'm using the Node-RED add-on. All of my other stuff like Influx, Grafana, those are all the Home Assistant add-on versions. So I have all my automations in Node-RED. I have a couple automations, native Home Assistant automations for whatever reason. One of them is the sort of the startup shutdown. Just sort of whenever I restart, it sends a message and then sends a message when it's started up again, just as a check. I tried to do that in Node-RED, but since then it didn't work as well. I guess it's just not tied as tightly to the Home Assistant startup shutdown.
Well, I think it also, Node-RED takes a little bit longer to load too, right? So.
Yeah. So that's it. We have a Roomba and I found a package online in the Home Assistant forums for the bunch of Roomba automations. There's a pretty great maintainer for a bunch of Home Assistant stuff for the Roomba. So I use those automations natively. I think that's it for what's in Home Assistant. Otherwise, everything, lights, climate, motion sensors, all of that is Node-RED. I just found the visual representation of Node-RED much easier, much more accessible.
Yeah.
When I started writing all of that stuff, that was before Home Assistant had the trace automation sort of debugging tools, and I imagine that would have been a lot more helpful. But even so, just being able to connect the nodes and then set up debug nodes where you can see the actual JSON structure, that was hugely helpful for me figuring that out.
Yeah, I mean, if it makes you feel any better, they came out with that, I think, like a week or week and a half after I switched to Node-RED, and I was like, well, all right, well, I guess my automations are here already, so. But I agree, it is actually really nice debugging in Node-RED, where you can like step through it, whatever, and things like that. So
yeah, being able to see all parts of the message, and getting the error messages in the debug log was really helpful. And now, actually, so in my day-to-day job, I'm an environmental consultant / business analyst, and I've actually been getting into Microsoft's sort of low-code, no-code automation platform called Power Automate.
Okay.
It used to be called Flow. And 100% my Node-RED experience was a huge help in getting up and running with Power Automate.
Interesting.
Just knowing about the message and sort of being able to parse different parts of the message and like learning about arrays, stuff like that I just didn't really have exposure to before. Parsing the JSON, taking a certain attributes or value, that kind of thing. 100%. I'm using that stuff in my day-to-day job now. And it was because I started using it in Home Assistant that my company is even looking at it.
Yeah.
That's amazing. That's very cool.
That's nice. It's even a really, like, I guess it's a easier way to learn, or it's kind of like baby stepping into not necessarily programming, but like logic at least, right? Like, which is nice.
For sure. Yeah, learning some programming concepts without having to necessarily deal with the syntax of the code and that kind of thing.
So something that I was bugging Rohan about last year, because he promised me he was going to do it, was the ability for Rohan to detect someone, a delivery driver coming to his house. Looking at your original email you sent through, you looked like you did a bit of AI on the edge with ESP32 cam. Can you tell us what you were doing with that and how that worked?
Yeah, that was, I started looking into that right around the time that Home Assistant started supporting the energy dashboard. I ended up going with an ESP32 and connected some current transformers. So I've got electricity power monitoring at our breaker box. I managed to set up on the Raspberry Pi furnace box. I set up a software-defined radio. I found another Docker container that I could run there to pull in my gas readings. So I didn't have a way to pull in my water meter. So I found this AI on the edge open source project that uses an ESP32 camera to take a picture of the water meter and then process that information to figure out what the actual readings are, what the values are, and then send that over MQTT, and you can pull it into Home Assistant.
And this is all locally?
Yep.
Without a cloud?
Yeah.
That's nice.
Water meter's in the basement, so it's just sending it over MQTT over my local Wi-Fi, and then pulls it into Influx and Grafana and all that. But I will say it sort of taught me the limitations of computer vision. Because it was so subject to, it was in a dark room, so the ESP was flashing an LED to take the picture. And if it didn't happen at the right moment, or there was a little bit of lag between the LED coming on and the camera, it wouldn't get the same light level on the picture. And so training the model, or at least based on the trained model that was available as part of the AI on the Edge project, there were a lot of bad readings or missed readings. So ultimately, that wasn't reliable enough for me to pull in my water meter data. So that's something out there that I want to pull in at some point, but I don't have a good way to do it right now, and I'm not about to cut open my water line and add a flow meter myself.
Yeah, that's fair.
Well, if you find a cool way, definitely let us know, or let me know at least, because that's actually that's a pain point that I have too, like where it's, because we have to self-report our water usage, and it's like. Mine's not too bad. My parents' house, though, it's like behind like a cabinet that's like whatever, right? So if I can just stick a camera there, OCR the text, whatever, and just have a display, it's just that much easier. So right now, what I do is because they estimate every other reading if you don't submit it, and then they'll go in and check. I think like I don't know whatever, like every second reading or whatever, like every reading that they didn't estimate, and it's like so right now, like 1 month I may be paying like double, and then the next month, not month, sorry, 1 quarter I'll maybe paying double, and then it might go down for like a third, right? Like whatever, like so. It's just it'd be nicer to just pay accurate fees, but it's like it's hard to see, what those numbers are like, right? So
yeah, and this could totally work on a longer time interval like that.
Yeah.
I think one of the issues I had was that I was trying to run it. It's on an ESP, so sort of a very limited microcontroller. I was trying to run all of this and do it at an interval of about 5 minutes,
Yeah.
so that I would have that regular reading. I could see sort of rates of water
Yeah.
usage as opposed to, on a monthly basis, you just run the command to take a picture a couple times at the end of the month or whatever you want. And then you have probably a better chance at getting one good value out of that, as opposed to my problem was if it got one wrong, the water rate usage would fluctuate like wildly high or wildly low, up and down all over the place if the numbers did not line up exactly. So
Yeah.
it could work better on a longer time scale. Hard to know.
So your plan is to do the analytics on, like, again, you're saying edge analytics, right? So i.e. on the actual ESP itself rather than take a picture and then Home Assistant process it.
Right. Yeah. This project specifically was a precompiled firmware for the ESP that did all of this, that had a trained machine learning model that was uploaded to the ESP, and everything happened. So all the ESP was sending over the local LAN was literally just the MQTT message with the value of whatever it was. So there was another project I was going to try where I ran a camera, one of the Wise cameras, and sent that information as an RTSP video feed to Home Assistant. And I was going to try to have it do some object detection in one of our rooms so that I could specifically detect like if our cats were in there or something along those lines.
Right.
But quickly ran into some of the limitations of my knowledge as well as the abilities of a $20 webcam.
Yeah, right.
Yeah. It's Cat Assistant version 0.1. We haven't really gotten to the production stage yet.
Yeah. That sort of gets at one question that I was going to bring up for you guys, which is how do you what sort of decision process do you go through when considering whether to bring a device or maybe even like a protocol into your Home Assistant instance? Like, as an example, it sort of was the Wise Sense, or the Wise Door Sense window sensors that I was replacing. Like, they were super cheap and that was great, but they weren't reliable enough. So I spent the $200 in the month of waiting time to order the Akara sensors from AliExpress. But that's a good example of sort of what sort of decision process do you guys go through when you're making your home automation decisions?
I think for me, it comes down to how I want to automate it. So, for example, I know Spotify is detected by Home Assistant. I don't activate my Spotify integration because I control the music through my Sonos speakers directly. So I don't want to necessarily expose my Spotify into Home Assistant. I guess that's one protocol. When it comes to, I guess, gadgets and IoT things, I've always been a fan of Z-Wave just because I think, having the sort of standard way for devices to communicate, I knew I could just buy any brand and I know it would work with other brands. I reluctantly used Zigbee, and I'm actually a big fan of Zigbee now. Once you get a few repeaters around the house, I think there are some quirks here and there, but when you've got cheap stuff like Xiaomi that actually works better than some of the more expensive stuff, I think that's a no-brainer. But yeah, any new device, I think it just comes down to, one, does it integrate with Home Assistant? If it doesn't integrate with Home Assistant, then it's sort of a no-starter for me, right? If it's cloud dependent, it'd have to be a very compelling product for me to do it. Or if it is cloud dependent, then as soon as something that's non-cloud dependent comes along, I'm going to replace it with that. So it would have to be cheap enough to justify, needing to be locked into a cloud. Yeah, I guess, it just comes down to what functionality and I'm going to be able to unlock by adding it to Home Assistant. If it's just a device that, is a smart device, but can't be really controlled with Home Assistant, then, maybe I wouldn't go with that. Because, if I'm going to have a device in Home Assistant, then I need to be able to justify what I can automate with it.
Sure. So you want to be able to do actions with it as opposed to just like read sensor data.
Yeah. Exactly. Unless it is just a sensor, right? Like if it's a power, an energy monitoring system, absolutely, that's fine. But if it's something that there's nothing worse than a smart device coming on and then you can't do basic things like turn it on or turn it off right remotely. Yeah. Rohan, what's your little decision process?
Yeah, I mean, not too different from what you said, Phil. I know you and I have talked about this, across multiple episodes and even offline, just in terms of how we do this. But it's fairly similar. I mean, in the sense that, first and foremost, it has to integrate with Home Assistant, ideally locally, ideally natively, i.e., not an external component, whatever. But sometimes it's also dependent on what's possible, right? So I think a few episodes ago I mentioned, I'm just sick and tired of my door lock. It was a Wiser Kivo in the US. I believe it's branded as Kwikset rather than Wiser. Same company, exact same device, just different engraving. So I think one of the big things there was, unfortunately, they are one of the only people that make a bore size for my for my door lock, for my bolt there. So they're one of the only people that make a size that has a smart device that actually fits my door. And I contemplated for the longest time, do I replace my door? And I'm like, is it worth spending a couple $1,000s just because I want to get this in Home Assistant? Like, the wife wouldn't really like that too much, so I was like, all right, maybe let's not do that. And so, unfortunately, I did have to pick one from Wiser, as much as of bad experiences I had with the Kivo. But really, it came down to they have a custom component for the platform, which again I didn't love, but fine, it'll work, and it's cloud connected. Again, don't love it, but unfortunately, those are the restrictions I have with, unless I want to spend a couple $1,000s on a new door. Other than that, pretty much if I can do it locally, I'd love to do it locally. I actually even got I don't have any devices for it, but I actually have a Zeus 700 series Z-Wave stick now. I'm pretty much fully Zigbee today, and or Ethernet, whether it's Wi-Fi or wired in, whatever. But other than that, yeah, like it's pretty much all the decision process is, can it fit into Home Assistant? And if it can't, then what's the point of me getting something smart? I might as well spend, half or quarter, because you're sometimes paying that smart tax, right? Of, it has a label of, connected or smart or IoT, whatever. So it's like, okay, here it's double, triple the price, right? And sometimes the devices are great, sometimes they're terrible. So if I'm going to pay that much, I want to make sure it's going to be local. I want to do, at least as much as I can.
Yeah, as I am adding things or replacing things, that's certainly what you guys summarized there is sort of the direction that I try to go as much as possible. I had some of those TP-Link switches that I've been slowly phasing out, even though I've just blocked them from the internet. So they work perfectly fine locally. So if I need like a couple extra switches, I have them. But at some point, I also try to, Rohan, you mentioned custom components and trying not to rely on those if possible. And I totally agree with that. I also have tried to, as I expand devices, keep them within some of the existing Home Assistant integrations that I'm already using. So you don't have, it sort of simplifies the system that one tiny step more, which it may not make much difference, but since it's all Home Assistant native, but it's sort of the goal. If it can be local, Home Assistant native, just like you said, Rohan, that's checks all the boxes.
Do you have any smart devices that aren't connected to Home Assistant?
Yeah, we have a bunch of Nest cameras, and they're Google Nest. We had those from our old house, and we sort of lean into those. And those, I think, biggest argument for those was ease of use, and both in terms of deploying the hardware and in terms of the day-to-day management and access to them. Like the app is pretty decent, at least until if Google ever deactivates the Nest app directly, then I would probably think about replacing them all. But they're relatively inexpensive.
But that's the risk with Google, right?
Yeah. Everything's always beta.
It is.
Do you have plans to keep expanding your Nest video cameras, or would you rather phase them out to something that would be more locally controlled and something you've got sort of more management over?
I would love to have cameras that are just PoE cameras all tied into some local NVR system, but one, we don't have Ethernet running through our house, so that would be something I'd have to do. And then just managing that, I'm sure it would be doable once it was up and running, but there's a decent process to getting that up and running, like getting all the software running, whether it's like a dedicated NVR system that has its own storage, or whether you're building it in something that is just running in a virtual machine somewhere and having the hardware for that. At this point, I think it was ease of use and sort of reliability, obviously sort of ironic considering it's cloud-based. But yeah, it was just going to be too much work for me to get something figured out that was like local, totally local.
Yeah.
So as something that I asked myself, because we just bought another camera like last summer, I think, to sort of improve our coverage in one particular area. I was thinking, do we really want to do this? But I think the one-time friction of shifting over to something totally local like that is just too much at this point for me anyways.
Yeah, definitely.
Even just cost alone is sometimes just a pain, right? So
yeah.
The other thing I was going to suggest is also if you're looking at, again, PoE cameras and you want to go that direction if you don't have the Ethernet there yet, but again, just simply from a box-by-box kind of replacement, assuming you can find something that kind of gives you the same coverage, if not better coverage than the Nest cams you use today, which are plugged in. Mm-hmm. Sometimes you get cameras that do run on Wi-Fi that also have a PoE power in. So you can just use a PoE power injector for now, right? Where it's kind of plugged in locally right next to the camera or wherever your Nest plugs into today, right? So it's just like a swap, right? So you take out that camera, put in this camera. Instead of using a power cord, you just use a PoE injector. And then tomorrow when you run Ethernet through the house, or at least to these locations, then it's just a matter of just swap it out and off you go. It's an extra component, a little bit of an extra step, but it might be a good stopgap for you too.
Sure. Something that could be on Wi-Fi now, but Ethernet later.
Yeah, exactly. So
yeah, that's a fair point. Yeah, that's something to think about. I don't have any other smart devices that aren't tied into Home Assistant, but I do have one other major system that isn't tied into Home Assistant that I would like to, and I'm certainly open to some suggestions here, but we have an energy recovery ventilator, so fresh air system tied into our furnace that, it basically pulls in fresh air from the outside, exchanges heat to minimize energy loss costs, and then that fresh air just gets circulated by our furnace system. And it came with a controller that does do some amount of, it regulates the cycle to some amount intelligently because it reads the temperature and the humidity of the incoming airstream, and then it sort of sets between different presets on the fan based on the temperature inside versus the temperature outside, humidity inside versus humidity outside. And I'm okay with it regulating that because I don't want to have to define all of that in Node-RED. But what I would like to be able to do is just toggle it on and off, so that if we open a bunch of windows and doors, because it's really nice out, we want that airflow, it just is smart enough to turn itself off. And I haven't figured out a way to do that yet.
How's the power control today on that thing?
It's plugged into a regular outlet, but the control panel is separate. And if the device loses power, it doesn't return to the same state when it comes back on. You have to manually push a button on the control panel to turn it back to whatever state.
I wonder if, again, because I know absolutely nothing about this, I wonder if you can just stick a relay somewhere in the between the control panel and the device itself, just to effectively block the communication of it, right? Like just.
Sure. So the control panel thinks it's telling the device to do something, but the device isn't actually doing that.
Yeah, and. Again, total disclaimer, I know absolutely nothing about this. So, if it blows up your system, my bad. Right. But I think, that might be, but for the listeners, I encourage you to, if this is something you know something about, feel free to shoot us a note and we'll connect you with Keir. Sorry, Phil.
Yeah. Feedback at haspodcast.io. We'll pass it on. Keir, what about, what sort of button is it on there? Because have you heard of SwitchBot, like the little robots that can just push a little arm down and press a button?
Yeah, that has been one thing that I considered. There's one button that you press a number of times to cycle through the different modes or to turn it on and off.
Right.
So that the SwitchBot could totally work. Just have a routine set up where if there are a number of windows and doors open, the SwitchBot pushes a button 5 times to turn it off or turn it on or whatever.
You might want some kind of feedback mechanism there too, right? So where whether it's SwitchBot or something like that, because you don't know if somebody walks by it and presses a button, right? And then now everything is off by one. Right? So
it needs to be two-way.
Yeah, my best idea for the feedback portion was to have a camera.
Yeah, exactly.
ESP camera, and this is back when I was doing the AI on the edge water meter stuff. ESP camera, and then do like a image recognition, not a full machine learning model, but just sort of image classifier, because there's only 5 or 6 different settings. And if you could recognize which setting it's on and then just expose that as a Home Assistant information, then you'd be able to know how many times to press the button.
Yeah, I mean the other thing too is like I said with the relay, instead of doing it between the sensor or whatever, just do it behind the button, right? Like so we had XBMC Nut who came on quite a while ago, quite a few episodes ago, talking about the Breville coffee machine automation. Right. And it's funny. So just I have one of those machines, and I've seen a lot of stuff where same thing, people stick a SwitchBot on top of it and it basically presses the on button, or I guess off button, it's the same button, right? So like on, off, whatever. The other thing, I mean, what he did was he basically opened it up, went behind it, and then simulated the button push with a relay. So that might be an option.
Yeah, that'd be something I could probably attempt in ESP Home. Yeah, ESP Home is one of my favorite Home Assistant timing projects. All of my temperature sensors are ESP Home devices. I have a couple LED strips. One of the smallest but most impactful projects that I've done. Our bed has drawers underneath the mattress, but there's not great lighting, and there's a really convenient ledge right above the drawer. So I have a LED strip running all the way around, and then segments built in ESP Home, so that when you open one drawer, right now there's a wide sensor that tells it to turn on that light segment, and that is actually really nice.
That's awesome.
I never thought of doing it that way. That's really cool.
Yeah.
Mid to long term, I think my goal will be to replace those Y sensors with direct wired sensors to an ESP32. Add some more LEDs to it, that kind of thing. But that is definitely one of the nicest things I've done with ESP Home.
That's cool.
What's the most craziest thing you've done with ESP Home?
That's an easy one. So we have 2 cats, and we don't keep them in the bedroom at night, but they want to get into the bedroom. So our solution right now is we have got one of these electric mats where you turn it on, and then if you step on it, there's a small shock, and that deters the cats pretty well. But
so hang on, so you're electrocuting your cats to keep them out of your bed?
No, not at all. It's really minor. It's like static electricity.
Yeah, right. When PETA comes calling, we'll send them your way. No.
So that's our solution right now, but we have to step over that. And so I thought maybe we could set up something with a water bottle. And I'd seen a couple ESP Home projects where they repurposed a air freshener, or they tied ESP Home into an air freshener. Yeah. So what I did was I bought an electric spray bottle, something that is sort of intended for gardening, where you push a button and it just runs a pump and waters. And I tore that apart, tied in a ESP8266, and I built a sort of a rectangular box that had motion sensors on 2 of the faces, and a motor that changed the spray nozzle from it pivoted the spray nozzle from one face to the other. So there were 2 motion sensors, and if one motion sensor detected motion, the electric spray nozzle would pivot that way and turn on the pump so it sprayed water. And then and if it motion on the other side, it would go back. And so
that's actually pretty funny.
There was an outlet right next to where it needed to sit. So it was really easy to power it. And it was sitting literally right outside our bedroom door. And if a cat got too close, it would pivot, spray the cat, and pivot back. But ultimately, either my implementation was not sophisticated enough, or it was sort of a flawed concept, because most of the time we just wake up and the carpet was soaked and the cats were like sitting just outside of their range. So that was a fun project to build, learn about like stepper motors and that kind of thing.
Yeah.
But not something that I kept in production for very long.
Yeah.
No, I bet.
Nice soggy carpets. Yeah.
I have another ESP Home project that needs to be rebuilt. My soldering skills aren't necessarily good enough to support it, but I tried to set it up. It's just a there's a module called a DF player, which is basically just you can put an SD card into it and it plays audio files. So you can connect speakers and everything. So I bought some little 3-watt speakers and connected it to it, and I sort of built it on this small little box, and I built one hall sensor or one door window sensor to it, and set it up so that if the door window sensor was triggered, it would play Rick Astley's "Never Gonna Give You Up" and Rick roll whoever had just triggered the sensor. So my plan was to set it up as a prank device in my parents' or my brother's home or something. But and I went so far as to actually try to set it up. But when I was laying out the sensor, my soldering was so shoddy that it just sort of detached inside the ESP. That's one of my projects.
That's fine. So you're using ESP Home to rickroll people in your life.
Yeah, exactly.
Interesting. Did you catch the Let's Get Loud event from that Home Assistant put on? Paulus was hosting.
Yeah. That speaker looked really cool. The ESP speaker.
Well, I was going to say there might be some really cool things that you can leverage from that project to do this, right?
For sure. That speaker right there, you could probably figure out some way to do sort of a remote sensor setup, and then you've got your Rickroll box all ready to go. That's
right. So we'll leave a link to the event in the show notes for those who missed it. But.
Yeah, absolutely. Definitely want to take a look at some exciting stuff happening. So one thing I am toying with at the moment is my Lovelace dashboard, and it sounds like you have gone a little bit crazy maybe with, you've done a mobile Lovelace dashboard. How did you go? What was the purpose of it? Just for your phone, or have you got phones around the house that you wanted to do a special Lovelace dashboard for?
I don't have any tablets or any phones set up right now. There is a place and where I'd love to put one right next to our thermostat with all the Home Assistant information. But no, I created a custom Lovelace dashboard for my phone just because I found the default Lovelace approach where it sort of dumps a bunch of entities into the a big area. Mm-hmm. So I use custom button card quite a bit. Actually, almost all of the entities on there are custom button card entities, and then I sort of came up with a format that I applied to all of my rooms. So, and I can share some screenshots for the show notes.
Yeah, that'd be great.
I came up with a format where I can have up to 8 entities in a room, and then 2 rows of those entities, and it works well on my home screen. That includes about all the entities I need for any room where I have temperature and humidity sensors, window sensors, and then a couple lights. And so I can use that for sort of that same template for all of my rooms. It just makes it easy to scroll through, and you get a quick snapshot of what each of the rooms sort of status is with temperature, humidity, if any windows are open, lights are on. It's really, really nice for sort of showing that information at a quick glance, and then also some indoor-outdoor air quality.
That's nice.
Yeah, it's interesting because I've always struggled to how you can group information nicely for rooms. Like I generally do, the buttons in the top header would be a room, and then you sort of you just get so much information. You got a whole bunch of screen real estate to take up. But on a mobile device, you don't have all that room to use. So having something where you've got those 8 buttons that I can see here just for one room, and then you've got multiple rooms on the one page, not having to change tabs all the time, that makes perfect sense.
Yeah, it's helpful in terms of actuating the buttons, so to speak, or accessing the buttons on a mobile device.
Yeah.
But the flip side is that if you have a room where where you need more or fewer entities, then it's pretty easy to set up a blank card with the custom button card, so it sort of fills in the blanks. But if you have more entities than 8 that you want in a particular room, then it ends up getting a little busy. It's also sort of limiting in that if you have something that doesn't easily fit that design, then it just doesn't look as nice. You have sort of a bunch of stuff slammed in at the bottom or the top or whatever. But
yeah,
so I use that exclusively on my phone. It's just, I find it easier. One downside is that if you want to make changes to it, because it's all custom button cards and there's a fair amount of YAML code there, you pretty much need to do it from a computer. It's hard to do that make changes from your phone.
One of the things I was playing with is to do something similar where I was using Lovelace Mushroom for a mobile UI, which was nice. But I do like yours because you've just got a bunch of stuff in one single little panel, right? Whereas you can do that with Lovelace Mushroom too. It's a little bit I realized as I was doing it, I'm like, ooh, I want a little more detail here. Ooh, I want this, I want that. And then now my panel just started expanding. So I really like what you have. And for the listeners, we'll post screenshots here if you could send those over whenever. We'll put screenshots of it because I do really like that. But like in Lovelace Mushroom, it's a little more like bubbly rather than whatever, right? So apparently, according to this, I'm home, which is not true, so that's not good. But
hopefully your security system's not just
yeah, oops. Yeah, so but yeah, like that might be from a config perspective. I know what you mean though, because my main Lovelace dashboard is all YAML based, right? So it's all you got to do it on a computer somewhere, but you can't just easily do it. But
I primarily access Home Assistant from my phone. I sometimes access it like while I'm working from home, just have it up on a screen. But not being able to edit Node-RED automations very easily from the phone is sort of one of my main complaints with Node-RED. Drawbacks.
I actually look to see at some point if I can find like a mobile app for Node-RED. No, don't do it.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, pretty much the extent of it is if I need to like deactivate a node, I can do that, but I can't do anything else.
Yeah.
So that's one argument for native automations.
Yeah, agreed.
Yeah, particularly getting beyond it's just like with the new automation builder in the UI. Just if you need like a quick automation idea, you can quickly, even do it like a prototype without all the conditions and all the logic. You can just do a very basic automation and then export it to YAML and build it out later, which is what I tend to do.
But the other argument there too is like, I don't know, at least for me, typically like my process involves like, I don't know, I guess I'm not the smartest person, so it takes me a little longer. So it's a little more involved where I'm like, okay, I got to sit down, I got to focus on this, and like, so it's not like I'm never like in bed being like, oh, I mean, I am in bed being like, oh, that'd be a cool automation, but I'm never in bed being like, okay, let me try and do this on my phone. Like it's just UI wise, it's just not even UI wise, sorry, like screen real estate wise, I just don't have enough to, at least document my idea of like, okay, what am I trying to do? Like break it down into steps, whatever. But so, I mean, I've thought about it a lot, but even when I was using pre-Node-RED, it never really was like, oh, I should do this on my phone, right?
Yeah, I have a couple other questions that I wrote down too for you guys, just to pick your brains.
Yeah, go for it.
Easy one. Anything that you have sort of had on your list to automate or implement that for a while that you just haven't been able to get to lately?
I mean, if you ask Phil, I have a whole list of that. He makes fun of me every episode for it. I mean, I think for me, all of my core stuff is there. It's just stuff that's like would be like here's a little embellishment and that kind of thing, and just like side project, which is more just for me to learn. Like I know Phil rags on me all the time for this, but like the whole like automation that I wanted to do based on like cameras to look for like, oh, UPS is here or FedEx is here or something like that, right? And in all honesty, that's more just for me to learn and understand like image manipulation, image classification, like that kind of stuff, right? More TensorFlow-y kind of stuff, machine learning-y kind of stuff, but not machine learning, but
sure,
image classification, let's call it that. But yeah, so other than that, I think for the most part, I'm at a pretty good stage. I do want to get more like energy stuff in. I know a while ago, one of our listeners actually was super kind and sent me a Sense kit that he wasn't using, and then so I said, okay, I got to get that integrated, but I don't have enough panels on my breaker box, so I'm waiting for my electrician to free up a little bit so that he can come in and move some stuff around, whatever, and then so that way I can do it. So other than that, I'm pretty happy with where I'm at. Phil?
So I moved house at the start of the year. So I've sort of gone back to zero I did a complete refresh. So even getting like my house is not automated to where I was previously in my old rental. So I have a lot to do. But the main objective I want to get done sooner rather than later is just lights. I've got a whole bunch of, I've got a couple of Z-Wave dimmer modules that I'm looking to get installed in the walls. I've got a couple of push button switches that I want to replace everything with. I think I've got a whole bunch of curtains or blinds that I've motorized with some semi-smart Zigbee blind motors, so they're working nicely. Getting beyond that, though, where would I want to go? I think I want to be able to get into irrigation control. I think that is probably the next frontier. I haven't tackled anything like that yet. And we don't have any irrigation in this house, so it'll be a complete project, from the ground up. So pretty excited to get onto that.
Yeah, that would be great. It's summer here in Minnesota, and so we're out watering the lawns, and having something that I could tie into Home Assistant and say, water this lawn more than the others, or just water it at all would be huge.
Exactly right. And then you can tie it in with, has it rained recently? Does it need, what's the moisture level like? Yeah, so much more powerful stuff you can do.
Yeah.
I guess that's a good one for me too. I do want to do that, but I've just started to get my grass back now, at least for outside, right? So once that's in, maybe I'll consider digging up my grass again.
It's also the problem of do you trust your automation? Like my wife would say, smart home's great, but it's so buggy. And I'm like, well, that's probably because I just, haven't done it properly the first time. It's iterative process. The last thing you want to do is just get your grass back and then accidentally flood it and it's back to square one, right?
Yeah, exactly.
Okay. Is there anything that you have wanted to be able to automate that you either haven't been able to or you couldn't due to technical reasons, whatever, anything like that? For me, right now, it's the ERV, figuring that out.
I guess I would want to automate everything that I could, right? Closing doors. I would love the ability to automate closing doors. So just, I think sliding doors, swinging doors, just, being able to automate the closure of those just so that, some people that I live with don't like to leave the doors open. And then in summer, flies get in the house and, constantly, just having to spray them or find them dead in a corner somewhere in a couple of months' time. So having the ability to, have automated opening and closing of doors would be amazing. I think it's very expensive to do. And I don't think it would it's not going to suit well in a residential house, right? That would be my thing that I would probably never be able to automate. Rohan, what about you?
I think for me, again, I mentioned my door. I think that would be it'd be nice if, again, I do have it in Home Assistant, whatever. I think I'd love for that to be local. So it's not that I haven't automated it. It's just not as ideal as I want it to be. The other thing is my back sliding door as well, from a lock perspective, because it's got one of those latches. Right? I don't know what they're called, but the little lever latches thing where up is unlock, down is lock or whatever. And I don't know of a good way to automate that. Right?
What I was thinking of doing for mine? I don't know about yours, but so when it's locked, you get that little thing that pops out and bolts it to the wall. Right? So you get hooks on the wall.
The latch part,
yeah. So that's just metal. So I'm thinking of unscrewing where it latches into and putting a wire with a Xiaomi door sensor so that when the lock is in place, it'll complete the circuit and the door sensor will say, okay, the lock is locked. At least in that way, in Home Assistant, all right, has the latch been pulled down and the door is locked. It's not automated, but at least it's a
peace of mind,
a way for you to know when you're leaving the house that, hey, we've actually locked that door. Because I've come home and I've realized, the sliding door's closed, but it's not actually locked, right? So someone could just walk around the back.
Yeah. Interesting. That also seems like way too much work.
Yeah, absolutely. But that's probably the cheapest thing I can think of.
Yeah.
I've heard of, and I don't know if it's a thing or if it was a prototype, but something called patio bolts that are automated. So they're little bolts that you put on a sliding door and they lock down into the floor. And I think there might be a company out there that might make automated versions.
Oh, yeah. I've seen those, yeah. I think my parents' house has one of those. It's to essentially lock the door down. So, because a lot of people, for us in our house, we just have a piece of wood that we put behind the door so that nobody can open it and so on and so forth, right? Even if they do somehow leave the latch, to get past the latch or whatever.
Yep.
Interesting.
Yeah, I've thought about, we have the same situation. We have one of those bolts that locks it in place vertically when the door is closed or if it's open a couple inches. But in terms of the other lock, and when we had these installed, I asked the contractor and they're like, the latch is really the main lock. The vertical bolt at the bottom is sort of
extra
secondary.
Yeah.
So I thought about whether it would even work, because our latch has a little lever that sort of ticks back and forth, like between, I don't know, like 2 o'clock and 12 o'clock or 2 o'clock and 10 o'clock on an analog clock. So I thought, could I place a door window sensor precisely enough so that when it was locked, the door would be closed. But if it was unlocked, the door window sensor would be open.
Right.
But that would certainly not be very aesthetically pleasing.
Yeah.
Right on the latch itself. So,
and also the accuracy of that would depend on the battery level of the door window sensor too, right? Like
true.
Yeah.
True.
Get tricky.
Yeah, something hardwired with like an ESP nearby into the actual latch mechanism would be great. But I agree, Rohan. It seems like a fair amount of work, and I don't know.
Yeah.
I don't have a great idea how I'd be able to pull that off.
Yeah, without damaging something. That's the biggest thing for me, right? It's
yeah.
Right. I've even looked into like just sliding door, like smart locks, right? I think there are some out there, but then you're looking at potentially having to replace your whole door, or they look like some dodgy Chinese company that you don't want to trust. They're not, standards. They're not Zigbee, they're not Z-Wave.
Right.
Yeah. I actually think it could potentially be like just a market that's ripe for the taking, right? Because it seems everyone's concentrating on, the deadlocks and the standard front door locks, but no one's really doing these, sliding doors or barn doors or patio doors that are.
Yeah. I think, if it's an entire mechanism, like handle and all, right? Because I think you have a lot more room to play with there. So that might be a cool way to do this. Am I going to invent a product that does this? No, but if somebody wants to do it and send me one, that'd be great. But
yeah, that's it.
I also pictured I think it's the August lock that had sort of went over the deadbolt that actuated the deadbolt on normal locks. Like a miniature version of something like that actuated just the latch back and forth on a patio door. That would be, again, maybe not the most aesthetically pleasing, but something that you could bolt onto an existing installation that might work okay.
Yeah, that's interesting. Again, if anybody has a better answer than what the three of us came up with, let us know.
Yeah, definitely interested in some answers there.
So my last question that I had was another softball. I know for me, price is usually a pretty major consideration. That's why I started with those Wise sensors that I'm finally now replacing. But with price as no object, would you do things differently? Or is there any one thing in particular that price has prevented you from pursuing for automation? For me, smart cellular shades would be huge, but they're pretty expensive.
I think for me, what it would be is for like door sensors and stuff like that. I'd love to have those wired in, just because I just despise changing batteries. Unless and it's just really wasteful, right? You're just chucking all these batteries in the garbage, or even proper battery disposal, whatever. Like, it's not. Is it the most environmentally responsible thing? No, right? So I'd love to have those wired, and that way I know there's companies that do this now, like AOTech and stuff, have like the recessed sensors and stuff like that. I think it'd just be more pleasing to, like, aesthetically to have that. So I think for me that would be one of my things, and then those could just go off onto like I don't know, back into a relay box somewhere, right, where I just have a bunch of things that just switch on, off, whatever, and can deliver the state back to Home Assistant. But yeah, I think that's what it would be. For me, if I had money to rebuild all this stuff, right? And that way it's like it never expires, it's not cloud connected, it's all still local. You don't have to worry about batteries. You don't have to worry about batteries. If I forget to change it for like 2 years, I don't have to worry about the battery leaking in there, all that kind of stuff. So not that that's happened before, but it's not impossible, right?
Could you just sign up to like one of those home security systems where they come and do like an install, put the wires in, and then keep it for like the contract period, whatever it's like 2 years or whatever.
Yeah.
And then, after 2 years, get rid of them and put in one of those open, I think there's some open source controllers, right? And then you can just use there, because they're not going to come and pull the wires out of your wall, right? Too expensive for them.
No. I think a lot of the ones here use Zigbee nowadays.
Yeah, gotcha.
And they've got like the chunky sensors, just like I do today, right? It's no different.
Yeah, well, that's it, right?
But yeah, I don't know if they run that kind of wiring anymore. A lot of houses are wired with it.
Interesting.
I think mine somewhere has it. Like some doors and some windows have it, but I couldn't tell you where those wires go. So like you have one side of the wire at the door or at the window, and then where's the other side? So no one knows.
So if money was no object. So this is interesting because I don't know, like, so there's, if you were to do like the smart home properly, you would go with like some expensive system that does it all right. Like it's got the fully integrated thing. I don't know if I necessarily want that though, because then I lose control.
Right.
So yeah, like I'm thinking like the big Control 4, one of those big brands that the expensive homes use, right? And just not having the ability to have an API access into it, or it to be all proprietary, that it's locked down. I don't like the sound of that.
Mm-hmm.
So yeah, I guess if money was not, I still wouldn't use one of those big systems. I'd rather have the control myself.
Yeah,
so, yeah.
I thought about that too. Having the ability to, it's sort of a double-edged sword, having the ability to find something that somebody put out on GitHub online that fixes a problem that you have is pretty great. But then 2 years down the road, if they stop maintaining it, and
that's it, right?
You can't use it anymore, then it's kind of too bad. But I agree. Not being able to pull that stuff in would be not as much fun.
I think if money was no object, what I would do is I design the system, or I just say, here is my ideas, here's the stuff I want to do.
You go do
install
it. Yeah.
Right?
Yeah,
exactly. And then I will do the automations in Home Assistant myself when everything's installed. Yeah.
Sure. So somebody else does the hardware and you do the software.
Yeah. But I've chosen the hardware. I don't want anyone coming in and saying, "Oh no, you should really use this." Right? No. I'm telling you what I'm using.
Yeah,
right? Because that's half. Online shopping and browsing. Fantasizing. Oh yeah, that product looks good. That's half the fun too, right? It's just
true.
Then having the management of having to install it, drill things in, and soldering and all that. Like, it's fun. The first one's fun. When you have to do it, like 7 times on the 7th door or something like that, then, okay, I'm over it.
Yeah.
Now, right?
And you guys are all concrete there, aren't you, Phil? Or are you?
Yeah, I'm on a concrete slab at this house, so there's no going underneath the house or anything.
Yeah. But it's funny. I've also thought about, like you're saying, going underneath the house. It makes me think about, like, so I've always, because we have an attic, right? Like, so it's just, unused space between the roof and the ceiling. I've also thought of just using that as my, like, throw cables out, throw whatever, and then use that as a central point of, like, connecting things. And then I was just like, am I actually going to do that though? So maybe that's another thing.
You're going to go up in the roof? No.
Yeah, like
up in the roof like that.
I mean, I've been up there before, but it's not like, I just don't like doing it, especially. I don't know if you notice right now, I'm already stuffy a little bit. That's just from my allergies from, like, standing outside for half an hour, right? But in over there, it's not. I'm not going to fare too well either. So
I thought about going up there for running Ethernet, that kind of thing.
Yeah,
I would also love to. One thing that is sort of a semi long-term project is some sort of permanent LED installation on the outside of the house.
Yeah.
So instead of having to string up the holiday lights every year. I just tell my wife this year, I think this is going to be the last year I'm doing these, because we have one side of the house where there's no gutter, and it's about, it's 2-story drop straight down. And when I'm putting the lights on that side of the house, it's a little bit disconcerting, to say the least. So having something permanent that was up there that we could just sort of turn on or off and isn't obviously on the outside of the house would be cool.
Mm-hmm.
We just this summer, I picked up one of those Tempest weather stations, and I wanted to put that on top of the roof. So I was up there drilling holes in my roof, sealing them with some sort of sealant, and crossing my fingers that when it rained, it wasn't going to come through.
That's funny.
So far, so good.
You just hear the rain coming, and you're like looking up your roof nervously.
No, yeah. That's funny. I think for the LED things, I think those can look so elegant too. Like, I think it was Carlo, like, years ago when we had him on the show. I think, and then after that, him and I were just chatting about it, and he's got that done, and it looks so nice, right? And that's in one of those things where I'm like, okay, that'd be kind of really cool to do too. So, and there's a few videos on. I think Dr. Z's has a video on it too. Yeah, it just looks really nice. I think. But
yeah, agreed. And when you have it all set up and you can just sort of change it for the holiday from the comfort of your home or from a mobile app or something.
Yeah,
I think that's pretty slick.
Yeah.
one of my ESP homes, it's really just a temperature sensor, but then it's communicating to a Raspberry Pi Zero, which is running Hyperion. So I have bias lighting on the back of one of our TVs.
Oh, nice.
And I was going to try to connect the LEDs directly to the ESP, but I discovered that there's a wireless protocol that you can run from, or that you can contact Hyperion with, that ESP Home supports, the, E31 or something like that.
Right.
But it pretty much sends the commands to Hyperion over my local LAN, so that way it's not directly connected to the LED strip, but it can tell it what to do. So
Right.
That was one of my other ESP Home projects. It's just, do so much stuff with that.
That's interesting. That's cool.
Cool. All right. Well, Keir, thank you so much for coming on, taking your time, chatting Home Assistant with us. We really appreciate it. Love talking about all your stuff. We'll leave links in the show notes to all your cool stuff that you're doing. I'll try and find the links to all those projects you're using as well, and the screenshots of your Lovelace as well. And if anyone has answers to any of the questions we've asked ourselves along today, reach out to us. Really appreciate it.
Cheers.
Thanks everyone. Cheers.
Thanks, guys.
If you want to share your Home Assistant journey or come on as a guest, reach out to us at feedback@haspodcast.io. That's HASS podcast.io.
The Home Assistant Podcast is hosted by Phil Hawthorne and myself, Rohan Karamandi. For links to topics we discussed today, check out our show notes on haspodcast.io.